For years, I believed I had earned a place in that family. Not demanded it. Earned it. When I married Carol, Madison was already 14. Old enough to remember her biological father leaving. Old enough to distrust the man who came after him. So I never asked her to call me Dad. I never tried to replace anyone. I simply stayed. I drove her to school when Carol worked early shifts. I sat through parent-teacher meetings where teachers looked at me before cautiously asking what my relationship to her was. I learned which food she hated, which music calmed her down, and how to tell when she was crying behind a locked bedroom door. When she turned 16, I bought her a used car. 3 weeks later, the transmission began slipping. Madison called me from a parking lot, frightened and embarrassed. I left work, drove across town, crawled beneath the car in my office clothes, and spent the following weekend repairing what I could not afford to replace. She hugged me afterward. Thanks, Jeff. That was enough. When college came, her biological father promised to contribute. He talked about responsibility. About how proud he was. Then the tuition bill arrived. His contribution did not. Mine did. I paid what Carol could not. I covered books, rent deposits, emergency repairs, and the small financial disasters Madison never understood because I made sure they disappeared before reaching her. I never kept score. That was my mistake. I thought love given quietly would be remembered loudly. By the time Madison became engaged, I genuinely believed we had become a family. She called me whenever something broke. She asked my advice about insurance, contracts, loans, and job offers. When her fiancé proposed, I was one of the first people she told. I opened a bottle of wine that night. Carol cried. Madison laughed. For a few hours, I looked around that kitchen and believed every sacrifice had led me there. Then the wedding planning began. Madison wanted something elegant. A historic reception hall, tall windows, white flowers, candlelight, a dinner no one would forget. The price was more than she expected. I volunteered to help. Not pay for everything. Just enough to keep her from beginning married life buried in debt. I compared venues. I called vendors. I read cancellation clauses, insurance requirements, overtime fees, and payment schedules. I built spreadsheets and kept copies of every email. It was tedious work. Invisible work. The kind people only notice when nobody does it. One evening, we sat around the dining table discussing 2 reception halls. One was beautiful but had strict cancellation terms. The other was less impressive but far more flexible. I recommended the safer option. Madison rolled her eyes. You always choose the boring one. I choose the one that won't take your deposit if something goes wrong. She leaned back in her chair. Her fiancé stared at the table. Carol said nothing. I explained that weddings involved multiple vendors, and one scheduling mistake could affect everything. I told her not to sign until we reviewed the contract together. That was when she looked directly at me. Coldly. Almost impatiently. You don't get a say, Jeff. You're not real family. The room changed. No one moved. I remember the hum of the refrigerator. The condensation on my glass. Carol's hand resting beside mine but never touching it. Madison waited for me to argue. I did not. I nodded. All right. She blinked. Perhaps she expected anger. Perhaps she wanted me to defend the years I had spent earning the place she had just denied me. But I had no desire to beg for membership in a family I had financed. I gathered the contracts, placed them in front of her, and stood. You're right. It's your wedding. Then I walked away. After that, I stopped advising her. When she asked which venue had better insurance coverage, I told her to decide. When she showed me decoration estimates, I said they looked fine. When she asked whether a payment schedule seemed normal, I reminded her that I had no say. I did not say it cruelly. That made it worse. Madison booked the expensive hall. She signed every page herself. She did not read every page. 2 months later, the photographer's company admitted they had scheduled the wedding for the wrong weekend. The replacement date conflicted with the reception hall. Madison called the venue expecting understanding. They pointed to the contract. The deposit was non-refundable. Not partially refundable. Completely non-refundable. Thousands of dollars vanished in a single conversation. Then the caterer demanded a new booking fee. Guests had to change flights. The florist could not guarantee availability. Her budget began collapsing one invoice at a time. Madison's biological father promised to handle it. He said he knew people. He said he would call the venue. He said not to worry. Then he stopped answering his phone. For 3 days, Madison called him. For 3 days, she heard voicemail. The house filled with panic. Carol cried over the lost deposit. Madison shouted at vendors. Her fiancé began questioning whether they should postpone the wedding. I stayed in my office. Not celebrating. Not gloating. Just listening to the sound of people discovering how much labor had once stood between them and disaster. Late one night, Carol entered without knocking. Her face looked older. "I'm sorry," she said. I stared at her. She sat across from me and folded her hands. "I should have said something that night." "Yes." "I should have defended you." "Yes." Tears filled her eyes. She was angry. "No," I said. She was honest. Carol flinched. I told her the sentence had not created the wound. It had revealed it. Madison believed I was family when she needed a father's labor, but not when I offered a father's judgment. Carol lowered her head. For once, she did not defend her daughter. The following evening, Madison came into my office carrying a folder. All the contracts were inside. The confident bride was gone. In her place stood the frightened girl whose car had broken down years earlier. "I read everything," she said. I waited. "You would have caught it." "Yes." "You probably would have fixed the photographer problem before it became this." "Yes." Her mouth trembled. Then she said the words I had stopped expecting. "I was wrong." I looked at her, but I did not rescue her from the silence. She continued, "I thought because you weren't my biological father, your opinion mattered less. But Dad disappeared. Again. And you've been fixing things my whole life before I even knew they were broken." Her voice cracked. "I treated you like a wallet with no right to speak." That sentence hurt more than the first because it was true. She apologized without excuses. Not because she feared losing the wedding. Because, for the first time, she understood what she had already lost. I agreed to help. But not as before. I told her I would call the vendors, negotiate new terms, and search for another venue. I would still contribute the amount I had originally promised. Nothing more. And I made one condition clear. Respect cannot appear only when you need me. She nodded. This time, she listened. The wedding eventually took place in a smaller venue. No marble staircase. No towering windows. No illusion of perfection. But when Madison walked down the aisle, she stopped beside me before taking her biological father's arm. She hugged me. Not for the guests. Not for the photographs. For me. "I know who stayed," she whispered. "I helped save the wedding. But I did not forget what nearly destroyed our family. Blood may explain where a person comes from. It does not prove who will remain when the contracts fail, the money disappears, and the people making promises stop answering their phones. Actions do that. So tell me, was I wrong to step back and let Madison face the consequences of calling me an outsider? Or was that the only way she could finally understand who had been standing beside her all along? I had always believed that disasters announce themselves with noise. A slammed door. A raised voice. A phone call in the middle of the night. But the disaster that nearly destroyed Madison's wedding arrived quietly, hidden inside 12 pages of legal language she had signed without reading. By the time she understood what she had done, the deposit was gone. The reception hall refused to return a single dollar. The photographer could not work on the new date. The caterer demanded another payment. Guests had already bought plane tickets, reserved hotel rooms, and arranged time away from work. Everyone began calling me. Carol came first. She stood in the doorway of my office with the contract pressed against her chest. "Can you look at this?" I kept my eyes on the computer. Madison signed it. "I know. She doesn't understand what they're saying. She said I had no say." Carol closed her eyes. The silence between us was heavy because we both knew this was no longer about a wedding. It was about every year I had been expected to carry responsibility without receiving the right to speak. "I should have stopped her," Carol whispered. "Yes. I should have defended you." "Yes." Her face twisted as though my calmness hurt more than anger would have. For years, Carol had relied on my patience. Whenever Madison dismissed me, she called it stress. Whenever her daughter treated my help as an obligation, Carol promised she would mature. I accepted every excuse because I loved them. Love can make a man patient. It can also make him easy to use. "I'm sorry," Carol said. I finally looked at her. She was crying, but I felt no satisfaction. I had waited years for her to see what silence had cost me. Now that she understood, the victory tasted like dust. "I don't need you to apologize because money was lost," I told her. "I needed you to speak when I was the one being thrown away." She lowered her head. That evening, Madison's biological father called. His name was Eric, though in our house he was usually referred to as Dad, as if the title itself excused everything he had failed to do. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. He promised he would straighten out the venue. He claimed he knew a lawyer. He said the contract could not possibly be enforced and called the manager a thief. Madison believed him. She always believed him. The next morning, Eric stopped answering. By afternoon, his voicemail was full. By evening, Madison sat at the kitchen table surrounded by contracts, invoices, and unanswered emails. I watched from the hallway. She looked younger than she had in years. Not like a bride. Like the frightened girl who once called me because her car had died beside the highway. Back then, I had left work immediately. I had driven through freezing rain, repaired the battery connection, and followed her home to make sure she arrived safely. She never knew I lost a day's pay. There were many things she never knew. I had negotiated her college housing contract when the landlord tried to keep her deposit. I had caught an insurance mistake that would have left her uninsured. I had challenged a tuition charge that did not belong to her. Problems disappeared before she saw them. She believed life had been kind. In truth, I had been standing between her and the consequences. Near midnight, Madison knocked on my office door. She held the venue contract with both hands. "Can we talk?" I said nothing. She entered slowly and placed the papers on my desk. "I read it." "All of it?" "Yes." "And?" Her eyes filled with shame. "You were right." The words were quiet. Almost painful. I leaned back in my chair. "About what?" She swallowed. "The deposit. The rescheduling clause. The extra fees. Everything." I waited. She wanted me to make it easier for her. To tell her anyone could make a mistake. To let her apologize quickly so we could return to the old arrangement where I solved every problem and asked for nothing. I did not. Finally, she whispered, "I shouldn't have said you weren't real family." "No. I was angry. You were comfortable." She stared at me. I continued, "You were comfortable taking my money, my time, and my advice. You only remembered I wasn't your father when I disagreed with you." Her face crumpled. "I know. No, Madison. Now you know. Before this, you only knew I would always fix things." She sat across from me and began to cry. Not loudly. There was no performance in it. I thought Dad would help. He promised to. He won't answer. I felt the old instinct rise inside me. The urge to protect her. To call the venue, pressure the manager, negotiate a reduced fee, and make the panic disappear. That instinct had controlled me for years. This time, I restrained it. "What do you want from me?" She looked at the floor. "I want your help." "And what happens after the wedding?" Her eyes met mine. "I respect you." "That isn't an answer." She took a breath. "I prove it. Every day. Even when I don't need anything." For the first time, she sounded like an adult. I opened the contract. The venue had made no legal mistake, but I found room to negotiate. They could keep the deposit, yet apply part of it to another date. The caterer agreed to transfer the booking. I found a smaller hall available 2 weeks later and convinced the photographer to send an associate. It took one afternoon. Eric called 3 days later. He claimed he had been busy. Madison did not ask him to fix anything. The wedding was smaller than she had imagined, but it happened. Before the ceremony, Madison found me alone near the entrance. She hugged me and whispered, "Real family stays." I held her, but I remembered the contract on my desk and the sentence that had exposed my place in her heart. Forgiveness came. Trust returned more slowly. So tell me, was I wrong to let her struggle before helping, or did she need to feel the weight I had carried for years? The wedding ended just after midnight, but I remained in the empty hall long after the last guest had left. The candles had burned down to small pools of wax. Half-empty glasses covered the tables. White flowers, so important only hours earlier, were already beginning to bend beneath their own weight. Madison had gone with her husband. Carol was waiting in the car. I stood alone among the remains of a celebration I had helped rescue and wondered why victory felt so much like grief. Everyone had praised me that evening. The caterer thanked me for reorganizing the schedule. The venue manager complimented my patience. Madison's friends called me a hero because I had negotiated, paid, repaired, and carried what others had abandoned. They saw one afternoon of work. They did not see the years behind it. They did not see the birthdays I financed, the emergencies I prevented, or the nights I sat awake calculating how much of myself I could afford to give away. And they certainly did not hear the sentence that still followed me through every room. "You are not real family." Madison had apologized. I believed she meant it. But forgiveness does not erase memory. It only teaches a man how to live beside it. During the reception, Eric arrived 40 minutes late. He wore an expensive suit and carried himself like a father returning to claim a position that had been kept warm for him. Nobody asked where he had been when the venue collapsed. Nobody mentioned the unanswered calls. He kissed Madison's cheek, posed for photographs, and walked her down the aisle while I stood near the back beside a support column. That was the arrangement tradition demanded. The man who disappeared received the visible honor. The man who stayed handled the invoices. I told myself it did not matter. That was a lie. When the music began, Eric gave a speech. He spoke about watching Madison grow, although he had missed most of it. He spoke about protecting her, although every real crisis had found its way to my telephone. People applauded. I did too. Slowly. Quietly. Because anger would have ruined her wedding, and I had spent too much saving it to become the man who destroyed it. Later, Madison found me outside. The night was cold. Music leaked through the walls behind us, softened by distance. She still wore her wedding dress, but her shoes were in one hand. For a moment, she looked like the teenager I had first met, uncertain, defensive, afraid of needing anyone. "You left the table," she said. "I needed air." She looked through the window at Eric laughing with her relatives. "He shouldn't have made that speech. He is your father." "No," she said. "He's the man whose name is on my birth certificate." I turned toward her. She stared at the ground. "You were the one who raised me." The words should have healed something. Instead, they showed me how deep the wound had become. "Why did it take a disaster for you to understand that?" She had no answer. Neither did I. She began crying, but I did not reach for her immediately. I needed her to feel the silence. Not as punishment, but as truth. Some apologies arrive after the damage has been repaired. That does not mean the damage never happened. I was cruel, she whispered. And Mom let me be cruel because everyone knew you would stay. That sentence struck harder than anything Eric had said. Everyone knew I would stay. My loyalty had not earned respect. It had removed the fear of losing me. They believed I could be dismissed, insulted, and pushed aside because I had trained them to think my love had no limit. Madison finally looked at me. I don't expect things to go back to normal. They won't. She nodded, accepting the answer. That was the first honest moment between us. I told her I would remain in her life, but I would no longer solve every problem before she felt its weight. I would offer advice when asked respectfully. I would help when help did not require me to surrender my dignity. But I would not purchase my place in her family again. She listened without interrupting. Then she held out her hand. Not for money. Not for a contract. For me. I took it. We returned to the reception together. Eric saw us enter. His smile weakened for half a second before returning. He knew what I represented. I was the evidence of every responsibility he had abandoned. He approached me near the bar. I heard you fixed the venue mess, he said. Yes. Madison's lucky you were around. There was something careless in his voice, as if my years of sacrifice were convenient circumstances rather than choices. She was lucky, I replied, until she began treating loyalty like a resource that could never run out. His expression tightened. He understood. So did Carol. On the drive home, she apologized again. This time, she did not mention stress, youth, or wedding pressure. She simply admitted that she had protected Madison from consequences because she assumed I would absorb them. I made your patience into an obligation, she said. Yes. I don't know how to repair that. Neither do I. The answer frightened her. It frightened me too. Marriage does not survive on apologies alone. It survives when behavior changes after the apology becomes uncomfortable. In the months that followed, I watched them both try. Madison called without asking for favors. She invited me to dinner and listened when I spoke. Carol stopped excusing disrespect before it could be confronted. The changes were small, but they were consistent. Trust did not return like sunlight. It returned like feeling to a wounded hand, slowly, painfully, one nerve at a time. I stayed. Not because they were entitled to me. Because under new terms I chose to. Still, some nights I remember that empty hall and wonder how many men stand behind families that celebrate them only when something needs to be saved. So tell me, can a family truly learn respect after taking a man's devotion for granted? Or does every apology arrive after something sacred has already died? People like to believe that one sincere apology repairs everything. It doesn't. An apology can close a conversation. It cannot erase a memory. For weeks after the wedding, I found myself noticing things I had ignored for years. Every habit inside our home carried a quiet history. Every routine reminded me how easily a man can become invisible while doing the work that keeps everyone else's life together. One Saturday morning, the kitchen faucet started leaking. Carol looked toward me automatically. Then she stopped herself. "I can call a plumber," she said. I smiled. "You could." She hesitated for a second before asking, "Would you mind taking a look first?" The difference was small, but it mattered. For the first time in years, she had asked instead of expected. Respect often returns in ordinary moments, not dramatic ones. I repaired the faucet in 20 minutes. When I finished, she wrapped her arms around me from behind. "Thank you." No excuses. No assumptions. Just gratitude. Madison changed too. Instead of calling only when something had gone wrong, she started inviting us to dinner. Sometimes she asked about my work. Sometimes she wanted to hear old stories about the house we had lived in when she was growing up. One evening she surprised me. "Do you remember teaching me how to change a tire?" I laughed quietly. "You were convinced the wrench was broken." "It wasn't broken. You were turning it the wrong way." She laughed with me. Then her smile faded. I don't remember thanking you. You were 16. I was selfish. No. I looked at her carefully. You were young. Being young wasn't the problem. What was? You believed love was permanent no matter how you treated it. She lowered her eyes. I did. So did your mother. Carol nodded from across the table. Either of them argued. Months earlier they would have defended themselves. They would have explained, minimized, or changed the subject. Now they listened. That was how I knew something inside our family had truly changed. Not because they never made mistakes. Because they finally accepted responsibility for them. Winter arrived. Snow covered the front yard, and the holidays approached. For years I had organized Christmas almost by myself. I bought gifts, planned meals, untangled lights from dusty boxes in the garage, and stayed awake wrapping presents after everyone else had gone to bed. No one had ever asked whether I wanted help. This year Madison arrived carrying 3 large storage bins. We're doing it together, she announced. Carol followed with rolls of wrapping paper. For a moment I simply stood there. Neither woman noticed the tears gathering in my eyes. They were too busy carrying boxes into the living room. The work lasted all afternoon. We decorated the tree together. Madison climbed the ladder to hang lights while I steadied it from below. Carol baked cookies, laughing every time flour landed somewhere it didn't belong. Nothing extraordinary happened. That was exactly what made it extraordinary. There was no tension. No invisible line separating me from the rest of the family. Only 3 people sharing responsibilities instead of quietly placing them on one pair of shoulders. Later that night, Madison handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed the 3 of us standing beside her first car after I had repaired it all those years ago. Someone had taken the picture without my knowledge. On the back she had written a single sentence. The man who stayed. I read those words twice before folding the photograph carefully and placing it inside my wallet. It remains there today. Not because it erased the pain. Because it reminds me that people can change when they are willing to confront the truth instead of running from it. The deepest wound in my life did not come from losing money or solving impossible problems. It came from believing that loyalty alone would earn respect. It never does. Respect requires boundaries. Without them, kindness slowly becomes expectation becomes entitlement, and entitlement eventually convinces people they deserve everything you give while owing you nothing in return. I finally learned to say no. Not because I loved my family less. Because I had finally learned to value myself enough to stop confusing sacrifice with silence. Madison still calls me. Carol still reaches for my hand when we walk together. Our family survived. But it survived because every one of us accepted that love without mutual respect cannot remain healthy forever. Sometimes the strongest act of love is refusing to protect people from the consequences of their own choices. Only then do they discover who was carrying them all along. So tell me honestly, would you have stepped away after hearing, "You're not real family"? Or would you have kept sacrificing yourself, hoping gratitude would someday arrive on its own?